Hello and welcome to the Economic Times Consumer Freedom Conclave, an episode that focuses on how India's true growth potential lies in being a better buyer's market by offering more choice for consumers. First up, we have Professor M.V. Rajiv Gowda, ex-member of Parliament Rajya Sabha, sharing his experience on consumer protection legislation. Let's listen in.
Pleasure to be here with all of you at the very important conclave looking at how to enhance consumer protections. Well, I've been a professor of economics and public policy at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, for decades, and a member of parliament as well. And in those years, I got to see both teach the theory of consumer choice in competitive markets, as well as be on the other side when I was in parliament for 6 years as a member of the Rajya Sabha. And today, I thought I would take you through a little bit of the journey related to the topic of consumer choice. What's the need for regulations and why do they exist? See, consumers need to have choices, and consumers need to make informed choices between various products that are offered in the marketplace. However, it's very, very crucial that the products that are offered in the marketplace meet certain standards, that they do not exploit consumers or harm them in any particular manner. And we also need to ensure that if there is an imbalance of power between a consumer and a seller of services or goods or some other products, that imbalance is somehow addressed. And that's why you need regulations of various kinds. Now, when you think about regulations themselves, there's a whole range of interventions that are possible. For example, you could have standards. There's something called the Indian Standards Institute, which says this ISI standard has to be met. We have Bharat 6 standards for petroleum emissions from vehicles, like that. Or you could have technology requirements. You have to install this in your machine, things like that. But at either end, there are many other possibilities. And one extreme form of regulation is the ban, where the government says this is not good for you, therefore we choose to ban this. And bans have a history of generating counterproductive reactions. So, for example, the most famous ban that you could possibly think of very easily is the ban on selling alcohol. Bans tend to trigger reactions where people essentially start doing things underground, indulging in illegal activities, break the law in various ways. I thought I would take you through a little bit of the journey related to the topic of consumer choice. The Real Estate Regulation Act came about because there used to be a lot of builders who would take money from an apartment buyer and not deliver the product on time or to specifications. And so the law came in a manner to ensure that home buyers are protected, that everything is registered, the imbalance of power between a powerful builder, a wealthy builder, and a homeowner, that this is all redressed in a very balanced manner. And in that context, we had to deal with other challenges because Parliament is not necessarily empowered to enact on issues related to land and real estate. That's very much something in our federal structure that's dealt with at the state level. Anyway, we worked out a compromise and we came up with a model legislation, and we allowed various states to adapt that legislation to their own needs. But fundamentally, we did not say that a builder who doesn't deliver will automatically be banned. We provided other ways to ensure that the project would see completion and maybe others could take it over, and that consumers and their interests were also protected. So that's just one example where consumer choice became much more of a reality. The other issue was the surrogacy regulation bill. So basically, a couple is not able to conceive and have a child of their own. So then they work out an arrangement, a contract with a third party who provides a womb, who basically you can insert a fertilized egg there, and then this other woman will bring the baby to term and deliver the baby 9 months later. And there are lots of challenges. One, is this going to be something that that becomes very exploitative of poor women who end up using this as an opportunity to earn money and lose their health and things like that? What happens if the baby is not born perfectly healthy? Then who is going to take care of the kid once the child is born? Lots of issues like that. And the government came up with this surrogacy regulation bill, which basically said that only family members could bear the child for other childless couples. And people like me, I actually led the debate in the Rajya Sabha, and I pointed out that in the Indian context, you would actually be hurting the family members who may not have much choice if they're pressured by others to ensure that they take, that they help bring somebody else's baby to term. So this was just one of the points, and there were many flaws in the bill which had already been passed by the Lok Sabha, but the government listened to me and to a whole bunch of others and actually sent the bill to something called Select Committee to be examined further in detail and to bring in the protections that ensure that everyone on all sides of all consumers and producers, if you want to call them, are all protected in the best possible manner. That's another example of how governments can play a very, very positive role in improving the regulatory environment. Going further, the e-cigarettes bill was introduced in Parliament, and again, I was the lead speaker from the opposition side. You are concerned about people going out there and smoking, right? That's fine. And but is this going to be as dangerous as smoking? Is this as harmful as ingesting all the other chemicals and everything else that goes along with breathing in smoke? Basically, consumers in this case are looking for a nicotine hit. And these devices are providing nicotine without the side effects of at least the smoke and the other things that people inhale. And so it behooves the government to actually do a proper study and decide, work out what are called the risk trade-offs. If it turns out that a large number of smoking addicts are keen on switching from smoking cigarettes or bidis or chewing tobacco through gudka and things like that, and to something which may turn out to be less harmful to their health, then it's good for them. It's good for society, which bears a huge healthcare cost associated with tobacco smoke. It's good for everybody. And and so basically I said that if the government wants to be careful in how these products are available, then you could you could make this a doctor's prescription, you could make this something that's available in a regulated manner through pharmacies, but this kind of an outright ban makes little or no sense. And I personally think that, that this is not the way government should go about regulating, that they do need to think through and they need to continue studies. And the science basically calls for at least two kinds of studies. One is called toxicology, where you look at the impact of inhaling e-cigarette nicotine fixes or on animals and then on humans, and you look at what's called the dose-response relationship. Okay, and we need more evidence of this to come out. And the other, of course, is something called epidemiology. It's a term that we are very familiar with in the COVID context. What's happening to populations, right? What we need is not an underground economy with illegal devices. I can assure you that people have written to me, people have spoken to me, that they have found these devices very helpful in breaking their smoking habit and switching to something that they consider less harmful and actually even getting off tobacco altogether or nicotine altogether. What are the overall agendas? The agendas for this issue of regulate versus ban is essentially all about making sure that we don't have counterproductive reactions, that we don't create an underground economy, we don't ban possibly relatively beneficial products compared to what is already out there in the marketplace. And I fully understand that there are certain substances that are addictive and harmful. Even when alcohol, which is legal in most of India and the world, is sold, probably around 5% of the population become alcoholic and ruin their lives. So we do need to have solutions that address that particular problem. But that doesn't mean that we need to deprive the other consumers of the product, of their enjoyment, and of being able to make judicious choices, and certainly of companies to create new markets which satisfy these consumer demands. So overall, let's call for more studies. Let's call for more balanced regulation. Let's be ready to think about regulation as something that changes over time and is tweaked and fine-tuned in response to the ground realities, and that we actually look at what you might call bans as a really outmoded and counterproductive method. So let's ensure that knowledge is disseminated, that the experiences of other countries are clearly communicated, and that ultimately we move to an era where regulation is more rational and where risk-risk trade-offs are fairly considered, and products that need to be allowed in the market, even if regulated tightly, should be allowed. So thank you very much, and I do look forward to better legislation, better regulation, and better health outcomes, better consumer choice sets in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have David T. Sweener, who has highlighted the importance of consumer freedom and its impact.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this conference. It's an incredibly important topic. And I've spent a career, almost 40 years now, working on measures to promote public health through policy interventions. And in fact, I was the first lawyer in the world to start working full-time on measures to reduce the carnage caused by cigarette smoking. And often the question comes up of why, when we're dealing with a health issue, do you have lawyers or economists or consumer rights people involved? Isn't this an issue for doctors or scientists? And I think that's a really important issue to address, and that finding out why people are getting ill is a medical scientific problem. But dealing with it is a social, legal, political problem. We need policy measures. We need the works of social scientists, of lawyers, of regulators, of politicians in order to address the problems that we have. And it's been thus all through the history of public health. You know, we can find out why people are getting sick, but then addressing it is a public policy measure. And I've found the impact that we can have is dramatic. The role of economics and law in particular, of recognizing consumer rights is enormous, of understanding why people are doing the things that they are, and how can we do something that can reduce that risk. So, for instance, when I got involved, Canada had the highest per capita levels of cigarette consumption anywhere in the world outside of a couple of countries of the then Warsaw Bloc. Our 15 to 19-year-olds, 42% of them were daily cigarette smokers. And this is just the beginning of the 1980s. And in looking at that as a policy person, I could say, well, why is this? And what had happened is that the inflation adjusted, the real price of cigarettes had been falling since the time of the Second World War. And disposable income had been going up because of economic growth. So cigarettes were becoming ever more affordable year after year after year. And the economic literature told us that affordability was the single biggest factor of whether young people would start smoking. And of course, when they start smoking, they usually continue smoking for the rest of their shortened lives. So I worked on measures to use tax policy to make cigarettes less affordable, to have the price more accurately reflect the risk of the product. And within 10 years, we reduced per capita cigarette consumption in Canada by 40% and teen consumption by 60%. And that was simply applied economics. And even at that time, we were constrained because we didn't have viable alternatives to offer people who were smoking, who would like to reduce their risk, but couldn't totally quit. So we were working with price elasticity, simply increasing the price of a product without being able to use cross elasticity, the changing the relative prices of products. And when we can do things like that, we're far more effective. And I think one of the lessons from my career is that when we're trying to change the world, in many ways we're revolutionaries. But if we're going to be successful at it, we have to be pragmatic revolutionaries. We have to look at what works. Forget about our personal ideology or our moral qualms or whatever else is going on, and focus on what works. Who are the people at risk? And this is something that is reinforced when we look at broad areas of policy, whether we're talking about law or economics or philosophy, that the importance of understanding what motivates people and recognizing their rights. Consumers can only make as good a decision as the information available to them allows. And if we do not give them adequate information to make an informed decision, and then we try holding them responsible for having made bad decisions, that is just an ethical failure. But beyond that, you need more than simply the information necessary to make informed decisions. You need the ability to act on that information. So people need to understand what are the risks they face and how can they reduce those risks. And they have to be able to actually take those actions necessary. So that if somebody says there's a great big storm coming, you have to seek cover, is only relevant if somebody can show you where that cover is, whether there's some place where you can be protected. And when we're talking about hazardous products, to know that you've got a really hazardous product is important to know. To know that there's something else you could do that would be far less hazardous, clearly important to know. But to be able to access those alternatives, that's essential. And those are the sorts of things that are enshrined in public health policy, public health documents. Even the Constitution of the World Health Organization from 1946, talks about the importance of people being able to take charge of their own health, the importance of having maximum health gains for the overall population. And we do that. We can do that by working with people, not by trying to dictate to them. And that's why it's such a mistake when governments think that the way to deal with a risk is to simply ban a product. And in fact, what a ban is an abrogation of your responsibility to regulate. Because it doesn't get rid of the product, it just forces the product or the behavior into a black market where we have very little control. It's a denial of rights to consumers. And where this really becomes problematic is when a government bans low-risk products but leaves the high-risk products on the market. When we find risk, we should seek to reduce it. That's a fundamental part of public health. And there will be opposition. There is opposition. It's said we can expect there to be opposition. But at some point, how do we make science, reason, the seeking of truth, and human rights dominate? Because if we get that combination right, the impact is really, really dramatic. We have a real opportunity, an opportunity we already see happening in other countries, to dramatically reduce the world's leading cause of preventable death, toxic tobacco products. We empower consumers. We work with them. We meet them where they are. We empower them to make better decisions. By working with them, partnering with them, not denying them access to better products, but facilitating that access to better products. And we have the chance for a public health breakthrough that is really on par with things like the eradication of polio or smallpox. It's to take one of these huge causes of death and disease and get rid of it. And we can do that. And it's based on issues of law and economics and consumer rights. It's about being pragmatic revolutionaries. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. Up next, we have a power-packed session where industry stalwarts discuss striking a balance between freedom of choice and consumer protection. Let's listen in.
Now, we turn to the public health expert, who probably can speak on marrying individual incentives, social values that allow people to behave in a particular fashion, and marrying them to how people individually behave to create the desirable outcome of conduct by individuals that is conducive to larger health of society. Konstantinos?
The difference between anarchy and freedom is that, anarchy has no rules, no regulations. Freedom includes some rules and some regulations. The problem and the compromise for freedom is when regulations are overreaching. And there are many reasons why regulations may be overreaching. It may be because of the lack of information. It may be because of misinformation. It may be because of misconceptions, predisposition. There are many reasons why this may happen. We need to find the balance. So the million-dollar question is, where is the balance? I think COVID is a typical case where we have missed the balance. So health and medicalization of a society are two very different things. And freedom is largely compromised in this setting of the pandemic. Of course, we need some additional rules. Of course, we are in a public health crisis, and of course, we may accept, and we need to accept, some restriction in our freedoms, because this is a difficult time, this is a crisis, and we have to do it for the overall good of the society. But where is the limit? And this is the big question. Where is the limit between freedom, personal protection, and something like enforcing a protection, forced protection? We are trying to create some rules for everyone to be protected, but what in reality, by getting over a red line and losing the balance, we are treating everyone as a high-risk group. We are basically treating everyone as an individual who is sick. And instead of, creating some overall rules, but also keep the main principle, which is the people who are vulnerable should be protected and should take also personal, but also public health measures to protect them. But now we are treating every individual as being, as having the same kind of vulnerability. So we must have rules, yes, and we need more rules and more regulations and more protection now during the public health crisis. But we need to set a limit. And this is also a problem with regulation. A regulation could mean what? Set the rules. The balance is the key. We need to find the right balance. We need to find the right balance in the world for COVID. We need to find the right balance in creating regulations which are necessary, of course, but without overreaching and instead of solving a problem, creating many more problems.
Yeah, thank you. Samrat, you wanted to come in.
Modification of behavior through nudges can be effective if done right and if done in a consistent fashion. What I do have objection with is using bans as a blunt instrument to change behavior, because that more often ends up having negative outcomes. Now, there's a recent example where during the pandemic, India banned tobacco use completely, as in it banned all sale of tobacco. Now, a FICCI report came out just a few days ago saying that in this period, there was an 8-fold increase in smuggling. Now, what that did was, so as a tobacco user, you could still get that product, but A, you had to pay like twice as much, and B, there was risk of counterfeit, which means you're not even getting standard quality products. So it's not that tobacco use stopped. It's just that you pushed it to an illegal market with no safety standards. Now, a similar thing was done in South Africa, for example, and they rescinded that ban out of fear that it's going to create a black market, which then becomes very difficult to shake off, because those are not tax products, so they'll always be cheaper. So that unintended consequence is not just for the time of the ban, but it has lasting effect. So the harm of using blunt instruments like bans should be really carefully considered, and also also the negative or the unintended consequences. Obviously, no one wanted people to buy from the black market, but that's going to happen. So there has to be some realism in policymaking when it comes to using an instrument like that.
With that, we've come to the end of this very engaging episode of the Economic Times Consumer Freedom Conclave. Thank you for watching.